The city skyline glittered a backdrop of 1,000,000 untold stories. But tonight, one story was about to erupt. Inside a penthouse that scraped the heavens, a millionaire prepared to propose to his mistress, a ring nestled in velvet, promising a future built on secrets. He was oblivious to the storm gathering just floors below. His pregnant wife, a vision in a backless red gown, was ascending in the private elevator. Her heart, a symphony of betrayal and resolve. She wasn't coming to plead. She was coming to play a game he never knew had even begun, and she was holding all the cards. The penthouse felt less like a home, and more like a testament to a man's ego. Spanning the top 3 floors of the One Dalton building in Boston. It was a marvel of modern architecture and interior design, a palace in the sky that belonged to Damien Sterling. Tonight, however, it was more than just his residence. It was the stage for what he believed would be the defining moment of his new life. Damien adjusted the knot of his Tom Ford tie, his reflection staring back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights of Boston sprawled beneath him, a glittering carpet of ambition and dreams. His own dreams, he mused, were finally within reach. He was a man who had everything wealth that could rival the GDP of a small nation. A reputation as a ruthless but brilliant venture capitalist, and the kind of good looks that made even the most hardened cynics swoon. Tonight he was adding another trophy to his collection, a fiancée. Not just any fiancée, but a woman who in his mind was the embodiment of perfection. Her name was Isabella Rossi, and she was everything his wife was not. Isabella was vivacious, spontaneous, and utterly captivated by him. She was a rising star in the art world, her paintings selling for astronomical sums, her beauty as breathtaking as her talent. He glanced at the small velvet box sitting on the polished obsidian of the grand piano. Inside rested a 7-carat flawless diamond ring, a bauble he had picked up without a second thought. The price tag as insignificant to him as a speck of dust. He imagined slipping it onto Isabella's delicate finger, her gasp of delight, the tears of joy welling in her emerald green eyes. A soft melodic hum reached his ears, and he turned to see Isabella emerging from the guest bedroom, a vision in a shimmering silver gown that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her fiery red hair was styled in loose waves that cascaded down her back, and her smile when it landed on him was pure, unadulterated adoration. "There you are," she purred, gliding towards him, her hips swaying with a dancer's grace. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about me." Damien's own smile was a carefully constructed mask of affection. "Never, my love. I was just admiring the view." He gestured to the city below, but his eyes never left her face. "It's beautiful," she breathed, nestling into his side. "But not as beautiful as what I see right here." Her hand slid up his chest, her fingers toying with the buttons of his shirt. He chuckled a low, rumbling sound that was practiced and devoid of genuine warmth. "You always know just what to say." He led her towards the dining table, a magnificent creation of glass and chrome that was laden with an extravagant feast. A private chef was adding the finishing touches to a dish that smelled of truffle and saffron. They dined in a bubble of feigned intimacy, their conversation a carefully choreographed dance of flattery and flirtation. Damien spoke of his latest business conquests, of the ifers he was building and the rivals he was crushing. Isabella listened with rapt attention, her eyes wide with what he mistook for admiration. In reality, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, her every move a strategic play in a game he was oblivious to. Isabella was no fool. She knew about Damien's wife, of course. The whole of Boston's high society knew about Amelia Sterling, the quiet, unassuming woman who was rarely seen by her husband's side. They called her the ghost wife, a beautiful but fragile creature who was content to live in the shadows of her husband's immense success. But Isabella had a secret of her own, a secret that was far more potent than Damien's infidelity. She had known Amelia long before she had known Damien. They had been friends once in a life that seemed a world away from this opulent penthouse. It was a friendship that had been shattered by betrayal, a betrayal that had set Isabella on a path of revenge, a path that had led her directly to Damien Sterling. As the chef cleared their plates and a sommelier poured them glasses of vintage champagne, Isabella's heart began to race. The moment was approaching, the moment she had been working towards for so long. She watched as Damien rose from his seat, his expression shifting from one of casual charm to one of serious intent. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Isabella." He began, his voice a low, seductive murmur. "From the moment I met you, I knew my life would never be the same. You brought a light into my world that I never knew was missing." He was a master of words, a puppeteer who knew how to pull the right strings. But Isabella was no longer his puppet. She was the one holding the strings now. He reached for the velvet box on the piano, his movements slow and deliberate. He opened it, revealing the magnificent diamond that sparkled under the soft glow of the chandeliers. "Isabella Rossi," he said, his voice thick with a fabricated emotion. "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He sank to one knee. A gesture of supplication that was as hollow as his promises. Isabella's breath hitched not from excitement, but from the sheer, unadulterated thrill of what was about to happen. This was it, the culmination of her meticulously crafted plan. She was about to give him her answer, an answer that would shatter his world in a way he could never have imagined. But before she could utter a single word, a sound pierced the carefully constructed silence of the penthouse. It was the soft, almost imperceptible chime of the private elevator announcing the arrival of an unexpected guest. Damien's head snapped up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He had given his staff strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed. Who would dare to interrupt his perfectly orchestrated proposal? The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, and a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman in a backless red gown that flowed around her like a river of molten lava. Her hair, a cascade of dark silken curls, was swept to one side, revealing a neck that was long and graceful. But it was her face that stole the breath from Damien's lungs. It was a face he knew better than his own, a face he had once loved, or at least a face he had once convinced himself he loved. It was Amelia, his wife, and she was pregnant. Her belly, round and full, was a stark contrast to the slinky, revealing dress she wore. It was a declaration, a statement that she was not the fragile, broken woman he had left behind. She stood there, poised and serene, her eyes the color of a stormy sea fixed on him. There was no trace of tears, no hint of hysteria. There was only a quiet, steely resolve that sent a shiver of unease down Damien's spine. Isabella, still on her knees, turned to look at the newcomer. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. The game had just begun, and the Queen had just made her move. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity, thick and suffocating. Damien, frozen in his kneeling position, felt as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. His mind, usually a sharp, well-oiled machine, sputtered and stalled. Amelia. Here. Now. It was a scenario so far beyond the realm of his calculated risks that he couldn't process it. He scrambled to his feet, the velvet box containing the 7-carat diamond slipping from his grasp. It hit the marble floor with a soft thud, the sound echoing the sudden jarring halt of his plans. Amelia. He managed his voice, a strangled whisper. What are you doing here? Amelia's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. She took a step forward, the silk of her red gown whispering against the floor. Her gaze flickered from Damien's stunned face to Isabella, who was now rising gracefully, her expression a mask of feigned surprise. I could ask you the same thing, darling. Amelia replied, her voice as smooth and cool as the champagne in their glasses. She gestured towards the kneeling indentation Damien had left on the plush rug, then to the discarded ring box. A proposal, I presume. How predictable. The word spoken with such casual disdain was like a slap in the face. Damien flinched. He was a man accustomed to control, to orchestrating every detail of his life. To be called predictable, especially by the wife he had so thoroughly underestimated, was a blow to his ego. This isn't what it looks like. He stammered, the cliché tasting like ash in his mouth. Amelia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Isn't it? You on one knee, offering a diamond to your mistress, while your pregnant wife is supposed to be tucked away ignorant and weeping into her pillow. It looks exactly like what it is, Damien. A pathetic B-list movie scene. Isabella, seeing her cue, stepped forward, her hand resting on Damien's arm in a gesture of proprietary support. Who do you think you are, barging in here like this? She demanded, her voice dripping with manufactured outrage. Amelia's gaze shifted to Isabella, and for the first time a flicker of genuine emotion crossed her face. It wasn't anger, but something closer to pity. Oh, Isabella, she said, her tone laced with a weary sadness. Still playing the victim? I see. It's a role you've always excelled at. Isabella's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Amelia's smile sharpened, turning predatory. We have so much to catch up on. Don't we, old friend? The words hung in the air, charged with unspoken history. Damien looked back and forth between the two women, a dawning confusion on his face. Friend, you two know each other. Know each other. Amelia let out a soft, humorless laugh. That's one way of putting it. We were roommates in college. Best friends, even. Before Isabella discovered her talent for acquiring things that didn't belong to her. The revelation hit Damien like a physical blow. He stared at Isabella, who refused to meet his gaze. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he was about to make his wife, was a stranger, a liar. His carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, the foundations built on a web of deceit he hadn't even known existed. Is this true? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Isabella finally looked at him, her emerald eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of fury. It's not what you think, Damien. She's twisting everything. She was always jealous of me, of my talent, of the attention I received. Was I? Amelia mused, taking another step closer. She was now standing directly in front of them, a formidable presence in her scarlet gown. Was I jealous when you stole my final project for our art history class, passing it off as your own, and winning the scholarship I had worked so hard for. Was I jealous when you started secretly dating my boyfriend, the first man I ever loved, and then flaunted your relationship in my face when I found out? Each question was a dagger piercing through the armor of Isabella's lies. She flinched, her composure cracking. "You're insane," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Amelia's smile widened. She reached into the small beaded clutch she was carrying and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, the edges yellowed with age. She unfolded it, revealing a sketch, a beautiful, intricate drawing of a weeping willow. "Recognize this, Isabella?" Amelia asked, her voice soft but menacing. "It was the preliminary sketch for my final project, the one you lost. I found it tucked away in one of my old sketchbooks. A sentimental fool, I know." She then turned her attention to Damien, her eyes locking with his. "And as for you, my darling husband," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you think you're the master of this game, don't you? The one pulling all the strings. But you're just a pawn. Damien. A pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she delivered the final devastating blow. "You see, I knew all about your affair. I've known for months. I was the one who anonymously tipped off the paparazzi about your little romantic getaway to St. Bart's. I was the one who sent that ridiculously expensive bottle of champagne to your table at Père C, the one with the note that said, 'Enjoy your last supper.' And I was the one who made sure the private investigator you hired to follow me was feeding you false information, leading you to believe I was having a breakdown, when in reality I was gathering my own ammunition." Damien's face, already pale, turned ashen. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had been played, manipulated, and outmaneuvered by the one person he had dismissed as weak and insignificant. But why, he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Why go to all this trouble? Amelia's expression softened the hard edges of her anger, giving way to a profound sadness. "Because you broke my heart, Damien. You took the love I gave you and you trampled on it. You humiliated me. You disrespected me. And you underestimated me." And that, she said, her voice regaining its steely edge, was your biggest mistake. She then turned to Isabella, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury. "And as for you, you snake, you thought you could slither your way into my life, take what was mine, and get away with it. But you forgot one thing. I'm not the same naive, trusting girl you knew in college. I'm a woman who has been to hell and back, and I've learned how to fight fire with fire." With that, she reached into her clutch again and pulled out another item. This time it was not a piece of paper. It was a small silver USB drive. "This," she said, holding it up for them to see, "is my masterpiece. It's a collection of every email, every text message, every recorded phone call between the two of you for the past 6 months. It's a detailed account of your affair, your lies, and your plans to ruin me. And I've already sent a copy to every major news outlet in the country, as well as to the board of directors of your company." The color drained from Damien's face. His company, his empire, his entire life was built on a carefully crafted image of power and control. An image that was about to be shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Isabella, a woman he had been about to propose to just moments before, and saw her not as a lover, but as a liability, a co-conspirator in his own downfall. The penthouse, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in on him. The city lights outside, once a testament to his ambition, now seemed to mock him a glittering reminder of everything he was about to lose. Amelia watched him, her expression unreadable. She had him exactly where she wanted him, broken, exposed, and utterly at her mercy. The game was far from over. In fact, it was just getting interesting. The immediate aftermath of Amelia's bombshell was a chaotic symphony of emotions. Damien, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He stared at the USB drive in Amelia's hand as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. His mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations, was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated panic. Isabella, on the other hand, reacted with the feral desperation of a cornered animal. "You're bluffing!" She hissed, her voice a mixture of fear and fury. "You wouldn't dare!" Amelia's lips curved into a chilling smile. "Try me," she said, her voice as cold as ice. "The press will have a field day with this. Millionaire mogul's torrid affair, with scheming artist exposed by pregnant wife. It has a certain ring to it, don't you think?" She then turned her attention back to Damien, her eyes narrowing. "And the board of directors at Sterling Industries. They're not going to be too pleased about this, are they? Especially when they find out you've been using company funds to finance your little love nest with Isabella." This was a new revelation, a fresh twist of the knife that sent another jolt of terror through Damien. He had been careless, so sure of his own invincibility that he hadn't bothered to cover his tracks. He had paid for the penthouse, the lavish gifts, the extravagant trips, all with a corporate credit card, a drop in the ocean of his company's vast wealth. But now that drop was about to become a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in a sea of scandal and financial ruin. How did you know about that?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Amelia's smile widened. "You're not the only one with connections, Damien. I may have been a ghost wife, but I was never a fool. I have friends in places you wouldn't even dream of, friends who are more than happy to help a woman who has been wronged." She was referring to her father, a man Damien had always dismissed as a quiet, unassuming academic. What Damien didn't know was that Amelia's father was a retired forensic accountant, a man who could unravel a complex web of financial deceit with the same ease that others read a newspaper. He had been the one to uncover Damien's misuse of company funds, providing Amelia with the ammunition she needed to bring her husband's empire crumbling down. The weight of it all was too much for Damien. He stumbled backwards, collapsing onto the plush sofa, his head in his hands. He was a man who had built his life on a foundation of lies, and now those lies were being exposed one by one with brutal efficiency. Isabella, seeing her dreams of a life of luxury and power slipping through her fingers, turned on him, her voice laced with venom. "This is all your fault," she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade of sophistication shattering into a million pieces. "You were supposed to be smart, powerful. You were supposed to protect me, protect you." Damien looked up, his eyes filled with a newfound clarity. He saw her for what she truly was, a parasite, a beautiful, venomous creature who had latched onto him for his wealth and status. "You're the one who started this. You and your petty high school vendetta against Amelia." "It wasn't petty. Isabella," screamed, her voice raw with a rage that had been simmering for years. "She took everything from me. The scholarship, the man I loved. She deserved to suffer." "The man you loved?" Amelia interjected, her voice laced with a weary sadness. "You mean David? The boy who broke up with you 2 months after you started dating, because he couldn't stand your constant need for drama and attention. The boy who came to me in tears, apologizing for ever having hurt me. This was a truth that Isabella had buried deep, a truth that she had refused to acknowledge for over a decade. But now, in the harsh light of Amelia's revelations, it was impossible to ignore. The fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of utter despair. She sank to the floor, her silver gown pooling around her like a puddle of melted dreams. She was defeated, exposed, her carefully crafted world in ruins. Amelia watched the scene unfold with a sense of detached satisfaction. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when the two people who had hurt her the most were finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions. But her victory was bittersweet. As she looked at the broken man on the sofa and the weeping woman on the floor, she felt not a surge of triumph, but a pang of emptiness. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself. She had wanted love, a family, a home filled with warmth and laughter. Instead, she had a penthouse filled with the wreckage of broken promises and shattered dreams. She took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. This was not just about revenge anymore. This was about her future, about the future of her child. She turned to Damien, her voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a cool, businesslike tone. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her words sharp and precise. "You are going to issue a public statement taking full responsibility for the affair. You will not mention Isabella by name. You will simply state that you made a grave error in judgment and that you are committed to making amends." She then turned to Isabella. "You," she said, her voice hardening, "are going to disappear. You will leave Boston. You will change your name. And you will never contact me or Damien again. If I so much as hear a whisper of your name in this city, I will release the rest of the information I have on you. And believe me," she added, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light, "what I've revealed tonight is just the tip of the iceberg." Isabella, her face streaked with tears, could only nod in mute acceptance. She had no choice. Amelia had her cornered, and she knew it. Finally, Amelia turned back to Damien. "As for us," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, "we are going to get a divorce. But it will be a quiet, amicable divorce. No drama, no scandal. We will present a united front to the public for the sake of our child." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And in return for your cooperation," she continued, "I will not release the information about your misuse of company funds to the authorities. I will give you a chance to salvage what's left of your company, of your life." It was an offer of an alliance, a truce in a war that had left them all scarred. It was a lifeline, a chance for redemption, and Damien, in his state of utter desperation, grasped it with both hands. "I'll do it," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do whatever you want." Amelia nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Good," she said. "I'm glad we understand each other." With that, she turned and walked towards the elevator, her red gown flowing behind her like a banner of victory. She had come to the penthouse as a victim, a woman scorned. She was leaving as a queen, the master of her own destiny. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Damien and Isabella alone in the wreckage of their affair. The penthouse, once a symbol of their forbidden love, was now a tomb, a monument to their shared downfall. The game was over, and they had both lost. Or so they thought. The true game, the one for power, for survival, and for the future of the sterling legacy, had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of carefully managed chaos. True to her word, Amelia orchestrated the narrative with the precision of a seasoned military strategist. Damien, stripped of his usual arrogance, became a surprisingly pliant puppet. He issued a public statement, a masterpiece of corporate contrition, admitting to an unspecified personal failing and vowing to focus on his family and his company. The media, hungry for a villain, was momentarily placated, their attention diverted by the carefully worded apology. Isabella, as promised, vanished. One day she was the talk of the Boston art scene. The next she was gone, her gallery representation rescinded, her social media accounts deleted. It was as if she had never existed. Amelia, through her discreet but powerful connections, had ensured her erasure was swift and absolute. The divorce proceedings were initiated, handled by a team of high-powered lawyers who operated under a strict non-disclosure agreement. The terms were generous, but with a crucial clause: Amelia would retain a significant non-voting stake in Sterling Industries, a golden handcuff that kept Damien tethered to her, a constant reminder of her power. But behind this facade of controlled demolition, a new, more complex game was unfolding. Amelia, having tasted power, found that it suited her. She had spent years in Damien's shadow, her own considerable intellect and business acumen dismissed and ignored. Now she was stepping into the light, not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a formidable player in her own right. She began to quietly cultivate relationships with key members of the Sterling Industries board, the very people she had threatened to expose. She didn't use blackmail or coercion. Instead, she used her knowledge, her sharp insights into the market, and her understanding of the company's weaknesses that Damien, in his hubris, had overlooked. She met with them for discreet lunches at the Capitol Grill, a world away from the flashy, trendy restaurants Damien frequented. She spoke their language, the language of profit margins, of market trends, of long-term growth. She presented them with a vision for the future of Sterling Industries, a vision that was more stable, more sustainable, and ultimately more profitable than Damien's high-risk, high-reward approach. One of her key allies was a man named Arthur Vance, the oldest and most respected member of the board. He had been a friend of Damien's father, and had always been wary of Damien's reckless ambition. He saw in Amelia a reflection of her father-in-law's prudence and foresight. "Your husband is a brilliant but undisciplined force of nature," Arthur told her during one of their lunches, his shrewd eyes studying her over the rim of his water glass. "He builds empires on foundations of sand. You, on the other hand, understand the importance of bedrock." Amelia, her baby bump now more pronounced under a chic, tailored dress, simply smiled. "I believe in building things that last, Arthur. For the sake of my child, and for the sake of the legacy that my child will one day inherit." It was a masterstroke, framing her ambition not as a power grab, but as a mother's desire to protect her child's future. It was a narrative that the old guard, family-oriented members of the board could understand and support. Damien, meanwhile, was adrift in a sea of his own making. The affair had been a symptom of a deeper malaise, a boredom with his own success, a need for constant stimulation and validation. Now, stripped of his mistress and under the watchful eye of his estranged wife, he felt a sense of emptiness that his vast wealth could not fill. He tried to throw himself back into his work, but the fire was gone. His usual ruthlessness was tempered by a newfound caution, a fear of making another misstep that would give Amelia more leverage. He found himself second-guessing his own decisions, his instincts blunted by the knowledge that he was no longer the sole master of his universe. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia's influence grew a silent, creeping power that was slowly but surely reshaping the company he had built. He saw the subtle shifts in the board's allegiance, the way they now deferred to her judgment, the way they sought her counsel on matters that had once been his exclusive domain. He felt a grudging respect for her, a respect that was tinged with a bitter resentment. She had outplayed him, outmaneuvered him at every turn. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married had revealed herself to be a queen in disguise, a political operator of the highest order. The tension between them came to a head during a tense board meeting to discuss a major acquisition. Damien was advocating for a hostile takeover of a rival tech firm, a bold, aggressive move that was typical of his style. Amelia, however, argued for a more strategic approach, a partnership rather than a conquest. A hostile takeover will create a toxic work environment and alienate their top talent. She argued, her voice calm and measured, but with an underlying authority that commanded attention. A strategic alliance, on the other hand, will allow us to leverage their innovation while maintaining our own corporate culture. It's a win-win, not a zero-sum game. Her argument was logical, well-researched, and ultimately more persuasive. The board, led by Arthur Vance, voted in her favor, leaving Damien isolated and defeated. That evening he found her in the library of their sprawling mansion, the one part of the house they still shared a neutral territory in their Cold War. She was reading a book on corporate governance, a glass of sparkling water on the table beside her. "You've been busy," he said, his voice laced with a sarcasm that did little to hide his frustration. Amelia looked up, her expression unreadable. "I'm just trying to protect my investment," she replied, her voice cool and even. "Your investment?" he scoffed. "You mean my company. Our company. Damien," she corrected him gently. "Or have you forgotten the terms of our agreement?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation. "What do you want, Amelia? What's your end game here? You have the money. You have your freedom. Why are you still here meddling in my business?" She closed her book, her gaze meeting his. "Because it's not just about the money, Damien. It's about respect. It's about proving to you and to myself that I am more than just the woman you cheated on. I am a force to be reckoned with." She rose from her chair, her pregnant belly a prominent silhouette against the firelight. And besides, she added a faint, almost imperceptible smile, playing on her lips. "I'm not done with you yet. The game is far from over." She left him then alone in the library, with the ghosts of his past mistakes, and the unsettling realization that his future was no longer his own. He was a king in a gilded cage, a puppet whose strings were being pulled by the very woman he had tried to cast aside. And as he watched her go, he felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion stirring within him. It wasn't just respect or resentment. It was fear. Fear of the woman his wife had become, and fear of what she was capable of. The backless red gown had been a declaration of war, but her quiet, calculated rise to power was proving to be far more devastating than any single dramatic confrontation. Life settled into a strange, tense rhythm. The divorce was finalized, a quiet affair that barely made a ripple in the society pages, a testament to Amelia's masterful control of the narrative. She moved out of the marital mansion and into a chic, modern brownstone in Beacon Hill, a home that was all her own, paid for, with the generous settlement from the divorce. But her connection to Sterling Industries remained a constant, looming presence in Damien's life. She attended board meetings via video conference, her image projected onto a large screen, a virtual queen overseeing her domain. Her contributions were always sharp, insightful, and much to Damien's chagrin, usually right. The company under her stabilizing influence was thriving, its stock price climbing to new heights. Damien, however, was a man adrift. He had lost his edge, his appetite for the ruthless, high-stakes game of corporate warfare. He found himself going through the motions, his days a monotonous cycle of meetings and paperwork. He was a king in name, only his power checked at every turn by the woman he had once dismissed as a fragile, insignificant creature. And then a new player entered the game, a ghost from a past Damien had tried to bury. It started with a series of anonymous emails sent to his private account. They were cryptic at first, just a single word or a phrase that seemed to have no meaning. But then they became more specific, referencing deals and conversations that had taken place years ago, details that only a handful of people would know. Damien initially dismissed them as a prank, a disgruntled former employee trying to rattle his cage. But then an email arrived that made his blood run cold. It contained a single attachment, a photograph. It was a picture of a young woman, her face partially obscured by shadows, but her eyes, wide and fearful, were unmistakable. It was a face he had tried to forget, a face that haunted his nightmares. The woman's name was Chloe, and she had been his assistant a decade ago, back when Sterling Industries was just a fledgling startup. She had been bright, ambitious, and utterly devoted to him. And he, in his arrogance and recklessness, had exploited that devotion, luring her into an affair that had ended in tragedy. Chloe had become pregnant, and in a moment of panic, Damien had pressured her to have an abortion, threatening to ruin her career if she refused. Devastated and alone, Chloe had quit her job and disappeared. A few months later, Damien had received a letter from her parents, informing him that she had taken her own life. It was a secret he had carried for 10 years, a dark, ugly stain on his soul. He had paid her parents a substantial sum of money to ensure their silence a transaction that he had disguised as a charitable donation. He had convinced himself that he had buried the past, that it could never come back to haunt him. But now it was clear that someone else knew. Someone who was using that knowledge to torment him, to unravel the carefully constructed facade of his life. His first suspect was Isabella. He imagined her bitter and vengeful digging into his past, looking for a weapon to use against him. But he quickly dismissed the idea. Isabella was a narcissist, not a strategist. This was too subtle, too calculated for her. His next thought inevitably was Amelia. Had she, in her quest for revenge, uncovered this dark secret from his past? It was a chilling thought, but it didn't quite fit. Amelia was playing a long game, a game for power and control. This felt different, more personal, more sadistic. The emails continued, each one more menacing than the last. They contained excerpts from Chloe's diary passages that spoke of her love for Damien, her heartbreak and her despair. They were intimate, personal details that only Chloe herself could have known. Damien was coming undone. He became paranoid, suspicious of everyone around him. He had his office swept for bugs, his computer scrubbed by cybersecurity experts. But the emails kept coming, a relentless psychological torture that was pushing him to the brink of a breakdown. He finally confided in Arthur Vance, the one person he felt he could trust. He told him everything: the affair with Chloe, the pregnancy, the suicide. He laid bare the ugliest chapter of his life, a confession that left him feeling raw and exposed. Arthur listened in silence, his expression grim. When Damien was finished, the old man sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "I had hoped the rumors weren't true," he said, his voice heavy with a weary sadness. "Rumors?" Damien asked, his heart sinking. "There were whispers back then," Arthur admitted. "Nothing concrete, just office gossip. But it was enough to make your father worry. He was the one who insisted on bringing me onto the board to keep an eye on you." This was another revelation that shook Damien to his core. His own father had not trusted him, had seen the darkness lurking beneath the surface of his ambition. "I think I know who's behind this," Arthur said, his voice low and serious. "And it's not who you think." He then told Damien a story that made the blood drain from his face. Chloe had a brother, a younger brother who had idolized her. His name was Ethan, and he had been devastated by his sister's death. He had never believed the story of her suicide, had always suspected that Damien was somehow responsible. Ethan, it turned out, was a tech prodigy, a brilliant but troubled young man who had spent the last decade honing his skills as a hacker, nursing a burning desire for revenge. He had been a ghost watching Damien from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "He's not after your money," Damien Arthur warned. "He's not after your company. He wants to destroy you, to dismantle your life, piece by piece, just as you dismantled his." The realization hit Damien with the force of a physical blow. He was not being blackmailed. He was being hunted. And his hunter was not just a disgruntled ex-lover or a vengeful ex-wife. He was a man with nothing to lose, a man who was driven by a grief that had festered into a dangerous, all-consuming obsession. The game had changed once again. It was no longer a battle for control of a corporation. It was a fight for his very survival. And in a strange, ironic twist of fate, the one person who might be able to help him, the one person with the strategic mind and the ruthless cunning to match Ethan's, was the woman he had so carelessly wronged. He had to go to Amelia. He had to confess everything, to lay bare all his secrets, and to beg for her help. It was a humiliating prospect, a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had defined their relationship. But he had no other choice. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, and Amelia was his only hope of waking up. The question was, would she help the man who had shattered her world, or would she watch with a cold, detached satisfaction as he was consumed by the ghosts of his past? The drive to Amelia's Beacon Hill brownstone was the longest journey of Damien's life. Each red light, each traffic jam, felt like a personal affront, a delay in the inevitable, humiliating reckoning that awaited him. He rehearsed his confession over and over in his mind, the words tasting like poison on his tongue. He found her in her garden, a small, beautifully manicured oasis of green in the heart of the city. She was kneeling on a cushioned mat, tending to a bed of roses, her pregnant form a picture of serene domesticity. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that was raging inside him. She looked up as he approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. "Damien," she said, her voice cool and guarded. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He launched into his confession, the words tumbling out of him in a torrent of fear and desperation. He told her everything about Chloe, about the pregnancy, about the suicide, about the emails, about Ethan. He held nothing back, laying bare the full, ugly extent of his past transgressions. Amelia listened in silence, her face an unreadable mask. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. She simply let him speak her gaze, never leaving his face. When he was finally finished, the silence that followed was heavy and profound. He expected an outburst, a tirade of condemnation. He expected to see disgust, revulsion, a final definitive rejection. What he saw instead was a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, a complex emotion that was somewhere between pity and a cold, calculating assessment of the situation. So she said finally, her voice devoid of any discernible emotion. The great Damien Sterling, brought to his knees by the ghost of a dead girl and her vengeful brother. Her words were a slap in the face, but he didn't flinch. He deserved it. He deserved all of it. "I need your help, Amelia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what to do. He's going to destroy me." She rose to her feet, brushing the soil from her hands. She walked to a small wrought-iron table and poured herself a glass of water. She took a long, slow sip, her mind clearly working, processing the information, analyzing the angles. "And why should I help you?" she asked, her back still to him. "You, the man who cheated on me, who lied to me, who was about to replace me with my childhood nemesis. You, the man who I now discover is responsible for the death of a young woman who was carrying his child. Give me one good reason why I should lift a finger to save you from the fate you so richly deserve." It was the question he had been dreading, the question for which he had no answer. He couldn't appeal to her love or her loyalty or her sense of shared history. He had destroyed all of that. So he appealed to the one thing they still had in common, their child. "Do it for our son," he said, his voice thick with a genuine, unfeigned emotion. "He doesn't deserve to have a father who is a pariah, a man whose name is synonymous with scandal and death. He deserves a father. He can be proud of a father who has atoned for his sins." He saw her shoulders tense, the first sign of a crack in her icy composure. She turned to face him, her eyes for the first time betraying a hint of the turmoil that was raging within her. "Don't you dare use our child as a bargaining chip," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "I'm telling you the truth. I want to be a better man, Amelia. For him. For you." The last two words slipped out unbidden, a whisper of a truth he hadn't even acknowledged to himself until that moment. In the midst of his downfall, in the face of his own mortality, he had come to realize what he had lost. He had lost not just a wife, but a partner, a confidant, a woman whose strength and intelligence he had so foolishly underestimated. Amelia's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the genuine remorse. She saw a man who had been stripped of his arrogance, his pride, his carefully constructed defenses. She saw a man who was broken, and in that brokenness she saw an opportunity. "This Ethan," she said, her voice shifting to a more businesslike tone. "He's a hacker, you said?" Damien nodded. "One of the best, according to Arthur. And he's using his sister's diary as his primary weapon." "Yes. He's releasing it in pieces, tormenting me with it." Amelia was silent for a moment, her mind racing. A diary is a narrative she mused more to herself than to him, and a narrative can be rewritten. A slow, cunning smile spread across her face, a smile that sent a shiver of both fear and hope down Damien's spine. It was the smile of a grand master who sees the entire chessboard, who anticipates every move, who knows how to turn a losing position into a stunning, unexpected victory. "All right, Damien," she said, her voice now firm and decisive. "I'll help you, but not for your sake and not even for our son's sake. I'll help you because this is a game I find interesting. And it's a game I intend to win." She extended her hand, not as a wife, not as a lover, but as a business partner. "We have an alliance," she said, her eyes locking with his. "An unholy alliance, perhaps, but an alliance nonetheless." And here are my terms. The terms were brutal. She demanded full voting control of Sterling Industries. She demanded that he step down as CEO, remaining on as a figurehead, a chairman with no real power. She demanded that he place a significant portion of his personal wealth into a trust for their son, a trust that she alone would control. It was a complete and utter surrender, a ceding of his entire empire to her. But he didn't hesitate. He had no other choice. "Done," he said, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her hand surprisingly warm. "Good," she said, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Now tell me everything you know about Ethan, his habits, his weaknesses, his digital footprint. We're going to hunt the hunter. We're going to find him. We're going to confront him. And we're going to give him a new story to tell. A story of his sister's tragic, accidental death. A story that will absolve you, and a story that he will have no choice but to believe." It was an audacious, breathtakingly ruthless plan. It was a plan that involved deception, manipulation, and the weaponization of a dead woman's memory. It was a plan that was morally bankrupt, and yet in its sheer, cold-blooded brilliance, it was Damien's only hope. He had come to her as a penitent begging for forgiveness. He was leaving as a co-conspirator, a partner in a scheme that was darker and more twisted than anything he could have ever conceived on his own. He had unleashed a force he could not control, a queen who was not content with just a piece of the kingdom, but who wanted the entire empire. And as he walked away from her Beacon Hill brownstone, he knew that he had just made a deal with the devil. But he also knew that for the first time in a long time, he had a fighting chance. The game was afoot, and he and Amelia, the most unlikely of allies, were about to make their first move. The story of Damien and Amelia is a twisted tale of love betrayal and the intoxicating allure of power. It's a reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. But their story is far from over. The unholy alliance they have forged is as fragile as it is formidable, and the game they are about to play with a grief-stricken, vengeful hacker is one with no rules and no guarantees. What do you think will happen next? Will Amelia's ruthless plan succeed? Or will Ethan the ghost in the machine prove to be a more formidable adversary than they could ever have imagined? Let us know your theories in the comments below. And if you want to find out what happens next in this saga of wealth, power, and revenge, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more Millionaire drama. You won't want to miss the next chapter. What happens when the perfect life is built on a perfect lie? For 7 months, Catherine Vance Thorne believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-million-dollar empire at their fingertips, and their first child on the way. She pictured a future filled with laughter in their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But her husband, the charismatic Marcus Thorne, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Catherine on a desperate drive to a secluded Hamptons resort, the masterpiece of deceit Marcus has been crafting is about to be slashed to ribbons. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power isn't in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above Central Park, New York City, looked like a schematic, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Catherine Vance Thorne rested a hand on the gentle, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the faint, fluttering kicks of the life within her. At 7 months pregnant, she felt both profoundly powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The nursery was complete, a serene masterpiece of cream and gentle grey, with a handcrafted mobile of celestial bodies waiting to spin above a crib that had cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was curated for perfection, a testament to the combined might of the Vance and Thorne dynasties. Her family, the Vances, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unshakable force in the city's financial landscape. Marcus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, daring wunderkind, the man who could scent a market shift like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the society event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Catherine traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. She looked at her husband, who stood with his back to her phone pressed to his ear. Marcus Thorne was a man sculpted by success. His Savile Row suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame, and his voice, even muffled, was a low, confident baritone that could soothe panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future. Or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone sharp. "The timeline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned a practiced smile, instantly softening the hard lines of his face. "Sorry about that, my love. Incompetence is the one market I can't seem to short." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world doing?" "We're good." Catherine smiled the familiar warmth of his touch, chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been active today. I think he's going to be a soccer player. Or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Marcus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey and something else she couldn't quite name. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne Creed Aventus, nor was it her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy, a woman's scent. She dismissed it. He'd been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen." He began settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something's come up. A big something. You know the tech merger I've been working on? The one in San Francisco?" Catherine nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, the key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it, but I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days. 3 at the most. It's the final push, Kat. This deal will secure our child's future 10 times over." A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. "Tonight? But Marcus, my checkup is tomorrow. The big one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again." His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. "I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I would rather be here holding your hand than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical." The timing is everything. He stroked her cheek. I'll be back before you know it, and I promise I will not miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Moustique after the baby comes. Just the three of us. The promise of a future luxury was a common balm he applied to present disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Marcus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. I understand. It's for us. Exactly, he said, relief washing over his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. I'll go pack. My flight is in 3 hours. As he walked towards their master suite, Catherine's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt was peeking out from the side pocket. Normally, she would never have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint alien scent of perfume, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of curiosity. Her heart thumping with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled the receipt free. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perla, the lingerie boutique. The date was from that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, an eyelash lace bra, a matching thong. Size small. Catherine was a medium, and with her pregnancy she had been living in comfortable, soft cotton. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to seep into her bones. There could be an explanation. A gift for a friend's wife. A present for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have given it to her with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands trembling. She took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of her pulse. She was being paranoid. The stress of the pregnancy was making her imagine things. Marcus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling a sleek Rimowa carry-on. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable but stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked every bit the global executive on the move. All set, he announced, his voice breezy. The car is waiting downstairs. Now I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go with you to the doctor, right? Catherine nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Marcus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Catherine had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotection. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. Good, Marcus said. He pulled her into a hug, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. I'll call you the moment I land. I love you more than anything. I love you too, she managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black town car, a tiny, insignificant figure 60 floors below. The car didn't turn east towards JFK or LaGuardia. It headed west towards the West Side Highway, towards the Hamptons. The cold dread solidified into a terrifying certainty. The San Francisco Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her, and her husband was not on a business trip. He was on his way to a rendezvous. Alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the Hewland trapping of their perfect life, Catherine Vance Thorne finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm that was about to break. She was not just a wife. She was a Vance, and the Vances did not crumble. They fought back. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her from her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The silence in the penthouse after Marcus left was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum from the climate control system seemed to mock Catherine's newfound solitude. She walked through the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life, the polished mahogany of the dining table where they'd hosted glittering dinner parties, the soft leather of the armchair where he read the Wall Street Journal every morning. It all felt like a movie set the backdrop for a story she had mistakenly believed was her own. She sank onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perla receipt burning a hole in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced, sifting through the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had glossed over. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed the weekends he'd spent at the office, but came home looking relaxed, not tired. The password on his personal laptop, which had always been her birthday, was suddenly changed. At the time, she had chalked it up to his company's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it seemed like a locked door she had never thought to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Catherine's posture. Beatrice Vance was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Catherine was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was blunt and fiery, her loyalty fierce and her bullshit detector flawless. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, foregoing a hello as she dropped her purse onto a chair. Did the Prince of Wall Street forget to kiss his pregnant princess goodbye? Catherine's composure, so carefully maintained, overnight crumbled. She handed her sister the receipt. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it, her lips tightening into a thin line. Size small. Beatrice said flatly, "Well, that's not for you, is it? Not unless he's planning for 2 years from now. The man is many things, but a forward planner in lingerie is not one of them." She looked up at Catherine, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Kath." What did he say? Through tears she could no longer suppress. Catherine recounted the story, the sudden trip, the San Francisco excuse, the car heading west. The Hamptons, Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course, it's off-season, quiet, exclusive, the perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Marcus has a corporate account at the Seagate. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff is trained to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Catherine's blood ran cold. The Seagate. Marcus had taken her there for their first anniversary. It was secluded, nestled in a private cove, a haven of understated luxury. The memory was now tainted, corrupted. "I have to know, Bea," Catherine said, her voice gaining a steely edge that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but beneath it, a new resolve was hardening. This was the Vance bloodline, kicking in the same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure?" Beatrice asked gently. "You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock." "What's more stressful?" Catherine countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "The agonizing uncertainty, or the cold, hard truth. This isn't just about my feelings anymore. This is about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deceit. I need to know what I'm fighting." Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "All right, then let's go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysterics. We gather irrefutable proof. We need more than a receipt for some slutty underwear." The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Catherine had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a reassurance, a tiny drumbeat of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Miller, if light travel was permissible. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Miller said warmly. "A short car ride, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't overexert yourself." It was the clearance she needed. The next step was intel. While Catherine was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Catherine returned to the car, Beatrice was tapping furiously on her phone. "Okay. I think I have something," she said, her voice low and excited. "My friend Jessica owes me one." She pulled some strings. "She can't access the Seagate's official guest list, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a booking was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couple's deep tissue massage, booked under the name Mr. Thorne. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." The words Mrs. Thorne felt like a physical blow. He was not just with another woman. He was giving her Catherine's title, her identity, in this secret, sordid world he had created. "The appointment is at 4 p.m. Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. "That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now." The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only path forward that felt real. Catherine called the family's trusted driver, a stoic man named Frank, who had been with the Vances for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to the Hamptons. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by the manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the Long Island Expressway. Catherine sat in the plush leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a maelstrom of past memories and future fears. She remembered Marcus proposing to her on a wind-swept cliff in Big Sur, telling her that his life had been black and white until she brought the color. Had that been a lie, too? Was he a sociopath, a brilliant actor playing the part of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. "Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We need to be smart. You are Catherine Vance Thorne. You have every right to be there. We'll go to the front desk. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You'll be charming, poised. They know the Vance name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. The Oceanfront Villa 7. That's where he is." Beatrice had managed to get the villa number from her source. Villa 7, the most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace that overlooked the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly. Then we wait, Beatrice said firmly. We sit in the lobby, we order tea, and we wait for Mr. and Mrs. Thorne to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut says they'll be back in the room. People like that, they want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for. As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to the Hamptons, Catherine felt a shift inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own fate. She smoothed down her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The unraveling thread had led her here to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull it until the entire tapestry of lies came undone. The Seagate Resort and Spa was designed to look like it had been carved from the very dunes it occupied. Weathered grey cedar, vast expanses of glass and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic, wildly expensive tranquility. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult. Frank pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the portico. A valet young and crisp in his uniform rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Catherine's hand a final firm squeeze. Showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it. Catherine stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders. She was the very picture of refined elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest raging within her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic desk of reclaimed wood. Catherine glided towards the desk, Beatrice, a half-step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Catherine said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Marcus Thorne. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Anja, offered a polite professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. It's a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Catherine produced her driver's license. Anja's eyes flickered from the ID to Catherine's face, then to the name Thorne. The recognition was instant. Marcus Thorne was a name that commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Anya said, her smile warming slightly. "Mr. Thorne is checked into Villa 7. I must say it's a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for some intense solitary work. The lie repeated by a stranger was like a fresh stab wound." Solitary work. Catherine's smile didn't waver. "He works far too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I'd like to be waiting for him when he returns." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the primary guest present was a breach of protocol even for a spouse. Anya hesitated, her professional training warring with the desire to please a guest of Catherine's stature. Normally we would need to call the room to get Mr. Thorne's verbal confirmation. She began, her tone apologetic. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Anya, I've just driven 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil the entire thing. Surely we can keep this our little secret? She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both authentic and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Anja's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Thorne," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program a key for you." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Catherine was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. Keycard in hand, they walked away from the desk. "Villa 7 is at the far end of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy." The most privacy to do what Catherine said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The walk to the villa was the longest of Catherine's life. They followed a winding stone path that meandered through wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of the crashing waves became a relentless roar. Each step was a drumbeat towards a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating. Her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they were there. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque next to a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. "Kath, are you ready?" Beatrice asked, her voice soft. Catherine looked at the door, then out at the grey, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in its own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit theirs. That image gave her the final surge of strength she needed. "I am," she said. She turned to her sister. "Wait here. I have to do this alone." Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Catherine's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Catherine took a deep breath, held the keycard to the electronic lock, and waited for the small green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa's entryway led into a spacious living area, impeccably decorated in shades of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne sat in a silver bucket on a low table, 2 flutes next to it. One was empty, the other half full, a faint lipstick smear on its rim. A man's jacket, Marcus's, was thrown carelessly over a chair, and from the bedroom just beyond, a partially open door, she could hear voices. A man's low laugh, Marcus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laugh in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she crept across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy post-coital intimacy. The king-sized bed was a tangle of white sheets. Marcus was propped up against the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting next to him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short, black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag, Catherine realized with a sickening lurch. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Marcus's chest with her finger. "You're sure no one will find out?" the woman's voice said. It was a voice Catherine vaguely recognized. "Your wife, she's not the suspicious type." Catherine Marcus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Catherine's heart into a million pieces. "She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in San Francisco saving the world. She's a good woman, but a little naive. It's one of her charms." He was about to say more, but he glanced up. perhaps sensing a change in the light or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Catherine's. Time seemed to stop. The color drained from Marcus's face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then morphed into shocked recognition. Catherine's blood turned to ice. She knew this woman. It was Sloane Davenport, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This wasn't some random, meaningless affair. This was a liaison with a direct professional competitor. Sloane Davenport stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, the three of them were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Catherine who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, calm, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It seems you're in the middle of some very intense, solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Marcus flinched, as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a ruin. And Catherine was standing in the rubble, the undisputed, terrifying victor of this first brutal battle. The silence that followed Catherine's words was thick and suffocating. Sloane Davenport, recovering her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter around herself, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Marcus remained frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The cocksure master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. "Catherine," he finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. What are you doing here? You should be in New York. The baby is fine." Catherine cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze drift disdainfully over Sloane, then back to Marcus. "I see the San Francisco Tech Summit was relocated, and that the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Marcus, or just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Sloane's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Catherine said, her voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Sloane to the spot. "You stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it through to its conclusion." Catherine took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She looked around the suite at the champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that, or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Marcus finally found his legs, scrambling out of the bed and grabbing for his trousers. "Cat, please. Let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk." "This isn't what it looks like." Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It isn't what it looks like, Marcus. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that sentence is? I am standing in a hotel room that you booked under your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm, half naked in a bed that you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is for how long." Sloane, seeing an opportunity to sow chaos, spoke up. For about 6 months, she said coolly, looking directly at Catherine. If you're going to have the details, you might as well have them all. It was a cruel, calculated blow designed to shatter Catherine's composure. But Catherine didn't even flinch. She didn't grant Sloane a single glance. Her focus remained entirely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Catherine repeated softly, nodding to herself. So this started just after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Marcus. You deserve an award for it. She turned her movement fluid and graceful and walked back towards the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a vacuum of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any screaming match could ever have been. Beatrice was waiting by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Catherine's expression, a mask of cold, terrifying calm, she knew. "Let's go," Catherine said, her voice flat. They walked back down the winding path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes pulling away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The adrenaline wore off, and the crushing weight of the betrayal slammed into her. She didn't cry out. The sob was a silent, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice wrapped her arms around her, offering what little comfort she could. "He's dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He's nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We will burn him to the ground." Catherine's trembling slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet," she said, her voice raspy. "First, I need to understand everything. This wasn't just a cheap affair, Bea. The woman was Sloane Davenport." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Marcus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What the hell is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Catherine said. "But I'm going to find out." They drove back to the city in near silence. When she arrived at the empty penthouse, it felt alien, contaminated. She instructed Frank to take her to her father's residence on the Upper East Side. She couldn't bear to be in the home she had shared with Marcus. Just as she was walking into the grand old world lobby of her father's building, her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Cat, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It is not what you think. Sloane is not my mistress. It's business. I am using her. Call me. It's vital." Catherine stared at the message, her heart pounding. "I am using her." It was a desperate, self-serving excuse, a classic narcissist's gambit, reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, albeit ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, to the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Sloane's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. What if in some twisted way he was telling a sliver of the truth? The affair being with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. "She's been feeding me inside information on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap, but I was the one setting it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Kat. I can explain." This was the twist. the sudden nauseating turn. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but a deeply unethical, potentially illegal act of corporate espionage. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for the affair. He was trying to rebrand it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband was not just a cheat. He was a fool playing a dangerous game, or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just been irrevocably blurred. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts. And Marcus, in his desperation, had just handed her a new and powerful weapon, the knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to ensure his complete and utter destruction. Alistair Vance's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Catherine shared with Marcus. It was a fortress of old money, filled with dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of leather and aged paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Catherine, flanked by a grim-faced Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an unreadable mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it, like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him the text messages from Marcus, he was silent for a full minute, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "But a dangerous one. To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy, it's a level of moral bankruptcy that is frankly impressive." "He thinks it will work," Catherine said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method. He's appealing to my avarice." "He is appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected gently. "He judges you by his own debased standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce attorney, Catherine. He has confessed in writing to corporate espionage. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, should it be handled incorrectly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Let's just release this to the board of his company." "Let's expose him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We do not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate on the assumption that Marcus is lying, that this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his skin. But we also operate on the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. Over the next 48 hours, the Vance residence became a war room. Alistair pulled in his top legal counsel and a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kobe, who specialized in discreet, high-stakes corporate intelligence. Catherine was not a passive participant. The shock had transformed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist, her mind honed by a lifetime of observing her father proving to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Kobe with every detail she could remember about Marcus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the new secretive patterns of his work. She gave him the login details to their shared cloud storage family accounts, anything that might hold a clue. Marcus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence, Catherine told the team, her voice steady. His real weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That's the vulnerability we will exploit. While Kobe began his digital deep dive, Catherine made a call. She dialed Gregory Shaw, Marcus's partner and the COO of Thorn Capital. Gregory was the cautious, steady hand to Marcus's daring, often reckless genius. He was a numbers man, a risk analyst who had on more than one occasion privately expressed his concerns to Catherine about Marcus's aggressive strategies. Gregory. "It's Catherine Thorn," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a significant undisclosed liability to the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe far from the financial district. Meanwhile, Kobe hit pay dirt. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Catherine had forgotten existed, he found Marcus's digital treasure trove. It was a series of encrypted files. But Marcus, in his arrogance, had used a password related to a personal milestone. Kobe's team easily cross-referenced the stock ticker of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Marcus's notes on the Sterling Nash takeover. And it confirmed his text messages. He was using Sloan. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had supposedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board's divisions, their largest institutional shareholders' pressure points. Marcus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Catherine saw it as a signed confession. But as Kobe dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the intel Sloan had supposedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings, and he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Catherine into the study. "There is a problem," he said, his Israeli accent precise. "The information from the woman Sloan is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, just enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, the ones about shareholder positions and their debt covenants, they are subtly wrong. They are not mistakes. They are traps." A hush fell over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Sloan has given him," Kobe continued, pointing to his screen, "is designed to encourage Thorn Capital to launch its takeover bid at a specific price point, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our real analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws that is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the takeover. The blowback would leave Thorn Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. The second twist. The real twist. So she wasn't the honey trap, Catherine breathed. He was. She was playing him from the very beginning. Sloan Davenport wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Marcus carefully crafted misinformation, leading him and his company towards a cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. She wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. She was gutting him from the inside out, using his own arrogance as her weapon. Alistair Vance allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant. Utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He handed you the gun to shoot him, and you've just discovered it's a cannon." Catherine now held all the cards. She had proof of Marcus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making a trap set by the very woman he thought he was controlling. She could not only destroy her husband personally, but could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet Gregory Shaw, she was no longer just Catherine Thorne, the wronged wife. She was Catherine Vance, the inheritor of her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Marcus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous place in Tribeca, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. Gregory Shaw was already there, nursing an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Catherine's call had clearly unsettled him. "Catherine," he said, rising as she approached. "Thank you for meeting me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, Gregory," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down immediately. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Marcus." Gregory's expression tightened. "I don't follow. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal?" "I'll admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections," Catherine said, finally taking a seat, "are based on a fantasy. A fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Sloane Davenport." The name landed on the table between them with the force of a physical object. Gregory visibly paled. Sloane Davenport. From Sterling Nash. That's impossible. It's professional suicide. For Marcus, yes." Catherine agreed. For her, it's the coup of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Catherine laid it all out. She didn't speak with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single damning piece of evidence on her phone, a time-stamped photo she had instructed Kobe to retrieve from the Seagate security footage, showing Marcus and Sloane entering the elevator together. Then she moved to the business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Sloane was leading Marcus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She didn't show him Marcus's confessional notes. That was her trump card to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data. Kobe had compiled the analysis that proved Sloane's information was a lie. Gregory listened, his initial shock turning to dawning horror, and then to cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Thorne Capital alongside Marcus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn that Marcus had exposed them all, not just through recklessness, but through a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control fire, Gregory said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip. Yes, Catherine said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the takeover is on Friday. We have 2 days. "What do you want?" Gregory asked, his eyes locking on hers. He was seeing her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player. A formidable one. "I want what you want, Gregory. To protect the firm. To excise the cancer. I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Marcus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be met with applause. He will be met with a unified front." "And you?" Gregory asked. "What is your price?" "My price," Catherine said. Her voice dropping is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be quiet, swift, and uncontested. He will walk away with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on Wall Street. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Friday. We'll be ready." The next 2 days were a blur of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvers. Alistair Vance worked his magic behind the scenes, his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. Gregory Shaw, armed with Catherine's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell the blood in the water, Marcus's blood. On Friday morning, Marcus Thorne walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Thorne Capitol building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was on the verge of the greatest victory of his career. He had tried calling Catherine dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was angry, hysterical, but would eventually come around once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox methods had secured for their family. He smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. "Good morning, everyone. A historic day." No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. Gregory Shaw sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members stared at him with cold, appraising eyes. "Before we begin," Marcus Gregory said, his voice dangerously calm, "we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies." Marcus's smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "My source is ironclad." "Is your source Sloane Davenport?" Gregory asked flatly. The color drained from Marcus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the boardroom doors opened. Catherine walked in. She was flanked by her father and 2 lawyers. She was composed, powerful, her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future, a future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. "Catherine," he choked out. "What is this?" "This, Marcus," she said. Her voice, ringing with clarity in the silent room, is called due diligence. Something you abandoned 6 months ago. One of her lawyers slid a folder down the table to him. It contained the photo from the hotel, the analysis of Sloane's flawed data, and on top printouts of his own text messages to Catherine. His own words condemning him. "I am using her." He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, out-thought, and utterly destroyed. "The board has held an emergency session," Gregory announced into the void. "We have voted unanimously. We are tabling the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we are asking for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." Marcus looked from the board members to Alistair Vance, whose expression was one of cool satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on his wife. Her face held no pity, no lingering affection. It held only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Sloane Davenport's scheme had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been uncovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything, all because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman who carried his child. Catherine stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She didn't need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she didn't look back. She was walking towards her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She had become the embodiment of its power. Her child would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged the queen of the board. In the end, it wasn't the affair that brought down Marcus Thorne's empire. It was his hubris. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed. They infect everything they touch. Catherine's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She didn't just survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own story and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Catherine's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless?